Hey, what's going on? It's at the letters for Thursday, December 16th. Arden Zwelling, Ben Nicholson Smith. Our producers are Christian Ryan and Nick Andrade. And Ben, we are opening up the ATL mailbag for the holidays. Not sure when you, the listener, are listening to this, but hopefully you are having a happy and safe holidays wherever you may be, whenever you may be listening. But Ben, time to answer some Blue Jays questions.
That's right. The lockout does not stop the flow of baseball content. Although I will say I don't mind, and this is early days still, I don't want the lockout to continue forever, but I don't mind not checking my phone to see if Ken Rosenthal has tweeted that the Blue Jays are acquiring Sean Manaea. I'm very happy to be talking baseball, but that kind of off-season anxiety, to have that disappear, I actually don't mind it. Just selfishly speaking, I don't mind it so far.
Yeah, it's nice to replace the baseball anxiety with various other anxieties and just kind of backfill that way. So we've got our questions. Thank you to everybody who submitted them via Twitter, via email, however you got them to us. We got them kind of ordered here in links, and I am just going to pick one at random, and we'll go back and forth and answer some questions. So first one I have pulled up comes from at 00Sammy17, Sam with a baseball emoji. He asks, what's the catching situation looking like, assuming no trades are completed? Jansen, Kirk to start the year, McGuire DFA'd again, question mark. When Moreno gets called up, what's that going to look like? What do you think, Ben?
It's a good question. I mean, especially with Moreno approaching, like no team is going to roster 4 catchers, and even 3 to open the year. To me, you find room on the injured list for someone just as a way to preserve depth. I don't know where you land, Arden, but like I wouldn't be in a rush to get rid of Reese McGuire. And clearly Jansen and Kirk are very valuable pieces for this team.
Yeah, I think all 4 guys come to big league camp, and assuming there isn't like a trade before then, so like assuming all things kind of remain the way they are, all 4 catchers come to big league camp. Camp goes on. If everyone stays healthy, at some point, Gabe Moreno is sent out, and you tell him, hey, you're going to start the year at AAA, continue to develop, off you go, and then you've got Kirk, McGuire, Jansen still around, play it out until the very end of camp. If everybody is healthy, I think the Blue Jays showed their hand last year and would likely DFA Reese McGuire again. If he gets through waivers, great. Goes off to AAA again, and he's in a good position himself as depth, just like he was this year. We saw how that played out, and then you got Kirk and Jansen in the big leagues. Like I think that's the most likely outcome as far as kind of low likelihood outcomes, but still some likelihood. Gabe Moreno shows up at camp and is just so undeniable that he starts the season on the big league club.
And, like anything in baseball, it revolves around deadlines. So you get to the end of spring, you start looking at setting that roster. And there will be other teams at that point that need catching. Someone else will have an injury. So if you're approaching that roster deadline, let's say March 30th, whatever the date is, then you can trade Reese McGuire to the Angels for cash considerations or for a player to be named, if that's what it comes down to. So we'll see how that all plays out. Let's move on to our next question here. This one comes from Lord_Atom. And this is a quadruple barreled question. So Arden, I'm going to throw all of this at you. You can kind of take it where you want to go to begin with. But Lord Atom asks, when do you think the lockout ends? Will there be missed regular season games? Any sense of what that deal could look like? Plus, predictions on who the Jays acquire post-lockout through trade or free agency, and do Bonds, Clemens, A-Rod, etc. deserve to be in the Hall of Fame? So a lot of questions to throw at you there.
There's multiple questions. When does the lockout end? Nobody knows. None of us know, but the 2 sides aren't really negotiating in a meaningful way right now. So it's not going to end anytime soon. I think the date where you start getting anxious about the possibility of regular season games being missed is February 1. If there isn't an agreement by that point, that's when I think you start getting a little squirrely, when things start getting a little bit dicey. Who do the Jays acquire post-lockout? Nobody knows, but we'll see. I think their needs are still as clear as they were pre-lockout. I think obviously an infielder, preferably a left-handed hitter, but it doesn't have to be, is a big one. I think he'd still need another back-end starter, and I think he'd still like another reliever. And I think there's also still a possibility where you go out and you acquire an outfielder and you trade from your current crop of outfielders as well to address one of those other needs, whether it's on the infield or in the rotation. And Hall of Fame, yes, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Alex Rodriguez all deserve to be in the museum. It is silly that we don't put them in the Hall of Fame. They can all go in. These are some of the best baseball players we've ever seen play the game. It's okay. They can go into the museum. Nobody's being hurt.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like you create this baseball museum, and then there's all this dialogue about who to keep out from it. You know, like you think that if you were building a museum of whatever it is, baseball history or aviation history or biology or whatever a museum is, like presumably you'd want things in it rather than things out of it. So yes, I agree. Put those guys in. They're a huge part of baseball history. Now I'll work backwards on these questions here. I think predictions on who the Jays acquire post lockout, we're going to get into detail on that with a lot of these questions coming up. So I'll kind of save my answer there. A lot of people have questions on that, and thanks for all the questions. We got a ton. We won't get to them all, but certainly we'll cover that in the course of this podcast. And as for the lockout and the timing there, I think that it will end probably early February. Maybe that gets pushed. Maybe it's late February, and that decides, try to extract a little bit more from each other by pushing it back. I could see a handful of games being missed. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if it's 154 that they play, but I think they're going to play essentially a full season. It's not going to be 60 games. It's going to be a full season, and that's a good thing.
Yes. So our next one comes from Matt Jessup, at Matt Jessup on Twitter. Ben, how worried are you that Alec Manoa will suffer, to some degree, a sophomore slump?
Not worried. Not worried. I think what we saw in 2021 was just really compelling. It was not the sort of performance that was built on smoke and mirrors. It's not like a first time through the league thing, and he's changing speeds and getting calls and benefiting from great defense behind him that was saving him from otherwise dangerous situations. To me, what Alec Manoa showed with the big fastball, the big slider, the willingness to attack hitters, be really aggressive in the strike zone, I think that plays as long as he's healthy. We see hitters struggle to face him. We saw the results all year long, even as lineups started to get a little bit more familiar with him. Teams like the Yankees, who saw him multiple times. So I think he's here to stay. I don't see a lot of concerns here. And, if anything, there is room to improve. He hit a lot of guys in his rookie season. I think that's something he'll probably look to cut down on moving forward. And there's also an aspect of controlling his emotions on the mound and learning to deal with the rigors of a full season, which, again, I think those are areas that he can actually improve in. So to me, I look at Alec Manoa and I see a guy who has a chance to be even better in 2022.
Yeah, I really don't have that much to add to that. I think you nailed it. The quote unquote sophomore slump is like this, I don't know, this weird idea that doesn't have a lot of basis behind it, or a lot of there's no real evidence to say that players are always going to struggle in their second time through the league or their second year in the league. I mean, there's every reason to believe that Alec Manoa could be even better next year. I think that he's still developing. You think about it, he's like, I don't have it in front of me, but I would imagine he now actually has more professional experience in MLB than he did in the minors. Just kind of wild. Like, he missed out on a lot of development time in the minors for various reasons, because he was kind of shut down after they drafted him, and then the pandemic, obviously. So I think that there's still a lot of development to be done there with him. So yeah, I think that he's just scratching the surface, and I think he can just get better. Like, as health permitting, and as long as he holds up to the workload and the durability is there, I don't see any reason to be concerned about him next year, to think that he's going to be anything but what he's been, and perhaps even better.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's stick with the young players on the Blue Jays roster here with this next question, which comes from Avi Jakubowicz. I hope I'm saying that right. I hope I'm saying everyone's name right as we move through these questions here. The question, Arden, is this: what are your projections for Vlad next season? Is it even realistic to expect improvement from a guy who obviously finished second in American League MVP voting this year?
Yeah, I think it's actually totally realistic to expect improvement, and like it's going to be marginal because he's already so good and he's already in a very elite class of MLB hitters, but he's also only 22, right? So like you think about other guys who are in that realm, like your Tatises and your Acuñas, like those are guys who have found ways, Sotos, to get a little bit better even as they're 21, 22 in their early 20s, even with some very good years under their belts in the big leagues, they've found ways to make little improvements. And then you look at guys, obviously, who are a bit further along in their careers, like a Bogarts or like a Trey Turner, who are also still getting better, right? And sort of entering their primes at 25, 26, 27 and making those improvements that you'd expect. So I think that for Vladimir Guerrero Jr., like, yeah, like it's hard to do better than like the 7 WAR season and, nearly 50 bombs and all that. But I do think he can still keep getting better as he matures physically and mentally and continues to develop. He's just 22, so I don't think there's any reason to think he's a finished product. I think he can still and should still improve.
Yeah, it's wild to think just how good he was, and then to forecast some improvement. And yet, I do think it's possible. I think you look at a couple areas. He hit 311, and I could see a batting title in Vlad's future. Like, I'm not saying it's likely because he plays in a league with Tim Anderson and even Bo Bichette. There are other strong candidates for that every year, but it wouldn't shock me if Vladdy hit 325 one year. He's just that good of a line drive hitter. I think that could go up. I think his walk rate too, this year was 12%. I think that will go up. I think that as he spends more time in the league, pitchers will be more scared of him. He will develop more of an understanding of the strike zone, which is scary because he's already elite in that regard. So I think you look at a guy who, if you're talking about a 300 hitter whose walk rate is about to go up, like his on-base percentage could end up being well above 400. Now, the power numbers, I'm certainly not going to predict that he's going to hit 48 home runs again. That is tough to do. But he's clearly, in a full season, he's going to hit 35 plus. And if your OBP goes up and he's over 430 as one, scenario with 38, 39 home runs, that might actually be a more productive offensive season. Toss in some refinement defensively as he becomes more comfortable at first base. There certainly are pathways for Vladdy to be a better player in 2022.
Yeah, just thinking generally about people in their early 20s, like you're still, getting better from a body composition standpoint. You're still, gaining muscle, like you can still trim a little bit of fat. Mentally, you're still just maturing and getting more used to the rigors and the grind of an MLB season and how you deal with the stress, the anxiety and the pressure and the expectations and all these things. Like, yeah, I think there's every reason to believe that he can be better. And I think that like the actual manifestation of that in his numbers might be sort of marginal because, like, as you said, like he's already kind of at the ceiling of what we've seen from MLB players. Yeah, if like that OBP goes from like whatever it was this year, 400 to like 410, maybe that's marginal, but that's something. Like I do think there is room for those little gradual improvements there. Our next one is from Curtis Martin, and Curtis asks, Ben and Arden, what are the chances that Jordan Groshans earns the third base gig out of spring training? Could this be his big breakout?
Well, I think this might be a quick answer from me. I think the chances are 3%, like really low.
I appreciate that you put an actual number on it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Jordan Groshans is a very good prospect, but the Blue Jays clearly aim to add an infielder and maybe two. And even if they quote unquote only add one, then the other position would be Biggio and Espinal. So, is there a scenario where there are multiple injuries and Groshans has a big breakout? Like, sure, but I'd put it at 3%.
Yeah, it's pretty low, right? I mean, he's off the 40-man roster right now, so he's up against it. They'd have to create space for him. I think the Blue Jays would very much prefer that maybe he goes back to Double-A next year. Maybe they challenge him with Triple-A right away. Like, it'll kind of depend. But I think they'd actually like him to continue playing shortstop in the minor leagues. If he came to the big leagues, he's not going to play shortstop because Bo Bichette exists. And like if he's so good that you have to have him on your big league roster as a third baseman, that's a pretty good outcome. But I think the most likely scenario, he goes back to the minors, keeps playing a bunch of shortstop, still plays some third as well to keep that versatility, and tries to just continue layering another good season on top of some pretty strong minor league seasons that he's had over the last 3-4 years now that he's been a professional. But yeah, I think he's getting closer to his big league debut, certainly, but out of spring training is extremely unlikely, I'd say.
At some point this year, I could definitely see that.
100%.
Or next year, I guess. Time is a bit of a blur these days. I think you know what I mean. All right, Arden, our next one comes from ya boy 9892, John Gibbons, #1 fan. As it stands now, how many of the relievers currently on the Blue Jays roster would you trust in some leverage? It improved over the season, but some people like Simber and Meza may be hard to trust in high leverage roles going forward.
Well, so the obvious ones are Jordan Romano and Tim Meza. That's easy. Simber and Richards, yes, I trust them in leverage. It's got to be the right situation. Like the matchups have to make sense. The spot has to make sense. Like, with Simber, like the ball's going to be in play. So, you want to be careful with the runners that you have on base or the types of hitters that you're coming up with. With Richards, matchups come into play as well. Just guys who maybe struggle against changeups or who his fastball plays well against. So, you have an understanding coming into the game of which leverage spots you would use those guys in. So they certainly qualify. Julian Merriweather, I think I would use in leverage. Absolutely. He's got the velo. He's got swing and miss stuff. He's faced leverage before in the past. The only question with him really has just been health. So like if he's healthy and performing, absolutely, I'm using him in leverage. And Yemi Garcia as well is a guy who you just gave 2 years and $11 million to. You didn't give him that money in that term to pitch mop-up duty. Like you gave it to him because you believe that he can thrive in leverage and you believe that he can face that type of pressure out of your bullpen. That doesn't mean he's going to be closing games, but I think that means he faces leverage in the 7th inning, probably often in the 8th inning as well. And then there are going to be days where Jordan Romano is unavailable and Tim Mays is on the IL to let some elbow inflammation die down, and Yemi Garcia is your closer, because that's just the way things have broken, right? So that would be the group from the bullpen right now. And that really is the bullpen. Like, am I missing anyone? And maybe you put Stripling in there. He's kind of your number 5 starter right now. Like, that's basically the bullpen. So it's hard to actually find a guy in this bullpen today who you're not trusting in leverage.
Yeah, and I think the reality is, in the course of a 6-month season, you need to trust a lot of guys in leverage. I mean, if you're in the bullpen, that means pitching in leverage. They're just, and Charlie Montoya would make this comment a lot last year. He would say, we're always pitching in leverage. I mean, there were very few games where the Blue Jays were, up by a ton or down by a ton. At least that's how it felt to some of the decision makers on that team at times. So yeah, I think you have to trust the bulk of your guys. To me, Romano and Meza, obviously. Simber and Richards put themselves in that tier late last year. Yemi Garcia, like you said, Arden, I mean, you don't sign him not to use him in leverage. To me, with Merriweather, I don't trust him yet. I did. There was a time that I thought he looked dominant, as longtime ATL listeners know. But, looking at how he ended the season, it wasn't good. And I don't trust it. It's not to say that he couldn't reestablish that trust, but right now he would not be on that list for me.
But if Julian Merriweather is healthy at the end of spring training, he's on your big league bullpen, correct?
Yes, He's in the bullpen.
So this is where it gets kind of interesting, right? Because there is going to be a cap on the number of pitchers you can carry next season, we believe, at 13. So you take your rotation and say Barrios, Gausman, Ryu, Manoa, and say they go get another back-end starter, whoever that is, right? There's 5 guys, the TBD there. And then you look at your bullpen, and it's Romano, Meza, Simber, Richards, Garcia, Merriweather, Stripling. That's 12 guys right there.
Right.
That really only leaves one, assuming health, which you can never assume, and assuming everybody's producing, which you can never assume. But if all things remained equal, that's 12 guys who I think are on this team, and that leaves one spot for your Ryan Baruckis and Trent Thorntons and David Phelpses and whoever else you want to put into that mix, whoever else they may even may still acquire, who would be in that mix for one remaining spot in the bullpen.
It really does get crowded pretty quickly. And so that's where guys like Barucki and Thornton probably don't have assurances of breaking camp with the team. But like you said, injuries will come up, opportunity will emerge, and basically everyone who pitches for this team will end up pitching some amount of leverage.
And sort of the unspoken thing in this as well is that in this scenario, Nate Pearson's a starter at AAA.
It's possible. Yeah. It's very possible.
To begin the season.
Although I think it's more likely he opens with the major league team, but you never know how things look. If he's not commanding the ball, then they might have no choice. But if he's commanding the ball in the zone, he'll be in the majors.
Let's go to Maureen at MB Brennan. Ben, do you think the Jays will look to acquire a second baseman? Also, a second question. Ryu was inconsistent this recent year. Do you think he can rebound?
Well, let's start with Ryu. I think that, yes, he can. I think that he's going to arrive in spring training ready to roll, and I think to open the season at least, he's going to be useful. I mean, I know that it was rough at times down the stretch, and really for months there from, I want to say, June into September. You look at the ERA, it was close to 5. But I think that with the benefit of rest, you're still talking about someone who in the course of multiple major league seasons has found ways to keep runs off the board, and he's never been overpowering. It's mixing and matching, spotting the changeup low and away, changing speeds, cutter in. I mean, this is a true pitcher, and I think you look at his track record, and I think to start the season at least, he's someone who's going to be very useful. Now, is he going to make 30 starts? I don't know. Could he go through a slump in July where he posts a 6 ERA? Sure. But, I think that for the months of April and May, at least, which, that's pretty significant from a planning standpoint, if not perfect, I think he's going to come out of the gate strong. And I don't know where you land on this part of the question, Arden, but to me, I wouldn't be that worried about Ryu if I was the Jays.
Yeah, I think that last year, and it's actually kind of a surprise we didn't see this from more pitchers coming off of a shortened 2020. I just think that workload and fatigue kind of caught up to him a little bit. And I think that was a factor for a guy who's already a veteran guy, but then you layer in the massive increase in innings from 2020. And and a guy who's always kind of dealt with little bumps and bruises and nicks throughout his career. I do think there was a little something with his delivery, just a little fundamental sort of like a little inconsistency with his shoulders maybe and his alignment to the plate, which is impacting his command. But I think it was pretty small. It's sort of thing with Ryu, he doesn't throw bullpens, right? So these are the sort of things that can be tough to catch and tough to work on when you aren't getting those bullpens in between your starts. That's why pitchers throw bullpens, to stay on top of these things. But Ryu, to your point, has been so good and so consistent throughout his career with his mechanics and his delivery and everything that he hasn't had to do that. And I just wonder if it caught up to him a little bit this season in concert with the fatigue that I think that he was feeling as well. So going forward, I think the Blue Jays will just be more cautious, more proactive just with how they manage his workload. I think you're right. I don't think he's an every 5-day guy. You just pencil him in for that throughout the season anymore. There's going to be stretches where he has to go every 5 just because the schedule necessitates it or circumstances necessitate it. But whenever you have the opportunity to sort of steal them an extra day, we've already seen the Blue Jays do it this year, 2021 quite a bit. Whenever they can use an off day or, use a spot start or something like that, give them that extra 24, 36 hours of recovery. The Blue Jays have done it. And I think you're going to see them do that more going forward. And I think ultimately it'll be beneficial over the long run for both Ryu and the team because of his results.
And I mean, look, at some point it goes for every player at some point. And at the end of 21, his stuff wasn't good. His command wasn't good. It wasn't a good combination. The results weren't good. I think there's a little bounce back coming there. And then the second part of that question was second base, right?
Yeah. Will the
I
Blue
guess
Jays
first part of
acquire
that
a second
question.
baseman? I think was it.
I think they're going to acquire an infielder, and it could be a second baseman. To me, I see third base as more likely. Just right now, you look at some of the options out there in trade and free agency. You look at how Biggio in particular profiles better at second. I see third as being more likely of the two.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. They'll acquire an infielder. It'll just depend on what's acquirable, which is the big thing that we never really mention. Is like what can you get and what's available to you. So it's going to come down to that.
100%. Okay, so next question here, and this is, we picked this one. A lot of people asked about this topic, and understandably so. So we picked this question from Jay's Retro, and the question is this. Can you please spend at least 30 minutes talking about Freddie Freeman? That we cannot do. We have too much to get to. But Arden, what did you make of the whole Freddie Freeman? I mean, you got Carlos Baerga posting on Instagram. You got, people going through the likes of Freddie Freeman's wife's Twitter page. Oh my goodness, she liked Kevin Gosman's tweet. And it was interesting. And what do you make of it?
It was like peak silly season, right? With rumors and everything. Look, so a few things, right, that just generally we need to accept. One, the Blue Jays check in on everyone. They do their due diligence on all free agents. Trevor Bauer last year was a good example of somebody who the Blue Jays talked to, but I don't know that they were ever that serious about. But they had just.
Sounds like he went to them.
It does sound like he went to them. Sounds like he wanted to meet with Pete Walker, and he wanted to talk to the high performance folks at the Blue Jays. Then all of a sudden spun off onto his YouTube page, was talking about how he was doing that stuff. I mean, whatever. And look, from the Blue Jays perspective, I think there's actually always valuable information to be gleaned from those discussions, even if you aren't that serious about the player. Like if you're the Blue Jays and you're thinking about maybe we're going to be extending a starting pitcher at some point, well, it might make sense to see hey, what's Trevor Bauer asking for? If you're the Blue Jays and you're thinking, hey, we might be extending a generational talent at first base at some point. Hey, let's see what Freddie Freeman is asking for and looking for and what those prices could look like on the open market, because that will inform the discussions we have with this hypothetical generational first baseman that the Blue Jays may or may not have and may or may not want to extend. So that's one thing. The Blue Jays as well, and we saw this happen a lot last year, maybe it's happening a bit this year as well, as a team with money to spend and a legitimate player at the top of the market are going to get thrown around in a lot of discussions, right? If you were the representative of any upper tier free agent, you want it out there that the Blue Jays are involved on your guy. You want that talked about because that creates leverage, that creates at least the appearance of a bigger market for your client. If you were having negotiations with a club that your client actually prefers to go to, but you don't love where those negotiations are going, or you're not really getting the feedback that you want to, that applies pressure to that club, can move them off of their position. These are just general things, but these are things that we know happen with the Blue Jays in free agency. So I think that we should put that out there. Are the Blue Jays going to sign Freddie Freeman? I think probably not. I think they could. I just think that then the ripple effects of that, it's just so hard to find the seamless fit there. Because you sign Freddie Freeman, he's your first baseman. The guy's played a dozen games at third base in his career. I don't think he's making a positional change at the age of 32. I don't think he's getting more agile as he goes forward. I don't think he's going to become a better defender, all of a sudden learn this new position this late in his career. So you sign Freddie Freeman, he's your first baseman. So now Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is your third baseman, or he's your DH. So if he's your DH, he's now clogging up that spot, and it kiboshes all of the work that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. did to improve as a first baseman and become playable there. You've now got a bat-only guy at the age of 22. That's not good. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is your third baseman. You want to go that route? Well, the last time Vladimir Guerrero Jr. was an everyday third baseman, he was objectively, empirically, the worst third baseman in baseball. And there's not a lot of reason to think that having not played the position for 2 years, he's suddenly going to be demonstrably better. at that position. And then again, you are like risking all the progress that you have made with Vlad over the last 12 months to get him to a place where he is like an incredible hitter, one of the best hitters in baseball, and playing like a pretty decent first base. All that work you're just going to throw out the window. So like ultimately, considering all those things, when a roster fit kind of looks this untenable on the surface, it's pretty unlikely that it's something that's going to happen.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you make a lot of good points there. And, you know, like there's so much context that's required for these kind of discussions, right? Freddie Freeman, you know, to start off, great player, would make the Blue Jays a lot better, at least in the short term, because he's one of the best hitters in baseball. So that's really intriguing. And his agency reps a lot of good players. It's not just Freddie Freeman, but Excel has guys like a Kyle Schwarber or Trevor Story. So again, maybe it makes sense to have a conversation where a number of names come up. And Freddie Freeman is a name that could come up in that sort of situation if you're exploring the market for any of those Excel clients. Now, does that go anywhere? Does that actually get traction? My understanding, and Shai Davidi's written about this at sportsnet.ca, would advise everyone to go and check that out. But my understanding is that's not a front burner item by any stretch. But of course, you do diligence and you try to understand what the overall situation is surrounding that player. I think, you know, if in a totally different universe where if Freeman, say, if Atlanta was a losing team and if Freeman had 1 or 2 years on his contract, like maybe he'd be really interesting as a trade candidate. I just don't know if you're looking at a 6 or 7 or, I don't know, 8-year contract for Freeman. At that point, it's such a big commitment. And then with Vlad, like you said, from a roster shape standpoint, doesn't necessarily make the most sense. So, you know, I think you can probably put that in the category of, hey, really interesting. You know, you want to understand the market, but I think probably less serious than, or less likely than even some of the other big names they've been linked to. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, the Verlander interest was, you know, really, more serious. Or Corey Seeger, right? We've talked about him. Corey Seager, that's one where like that actually could have happened. You know, like there were worlds where that actually, they had real interest. They liked Seager a lot. Didn't happen. You know, we don't know what the offer was. We don't know if they made an offer, but there was real interest there. The Freddie Freeman one, you know, like I think Carlos Baerga's post with the flames and the sound effects like might have overstated and overhyped the likelihood. But you know, it was fun. It was a fun day in the
peak
baseball
silly season, man. That's what it is. Like it's
right.
Yeah. Do you think that Freddie Freeman plays anywhere other than Atlanta or the Dodgers next year?
You know, I wonder about the Yankees because they just haven't done anything. I think the Yankees, like for Correa or Freeman, could be a threat. But yeah, I think those are the three teams: Atlanta, Dodgers, Yankees.
Yeah, no, if I'm putting my money on it, I think the Dodgers might sneak in and get something done there. But it still does seem pretty likely that he goes back to Atlanta. Like, it just makes a lot of sense that he goes back to Atlanta. But we shall see. Hey, this is a good point to step away and take a break. But when we come back, more of your questions on At The Letters. It continues on At The Letters. Arden Swelling, Ben Nicholson Smith. Happy holidays, everybody. We are answering your questions. Let's get right back to it. This one comes in from Simon Massey. And the question is you're taking the under on 0.5 contracts of more than $50 million before January 31st, 2022, your worst ever guess? Ben, we are all about accountability here on At The Letters. So we're go ahead. Let's hear what you got.
Is that my worst ever guess? Not even close. Not even close.
Yeah. You think that's bad?
Yeah. Like I think, you know, you write about baseball for X number of years and you make we make a lot of predictions, and you know, not only on the podcast but lots of different platforms. And man, I whiff all the time. Like this wouldn't even make the pantheon of bad takes. But I mean, yeah, like no doubt this offseason, I have no problem admitting that it actually brings me happiness to admit that I was wrong with respect to how this offseason would unfold, because it was great. November was awesome. It was the best month of hot stove activity we've had in years. So I was thrilled to be wrong. And yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that take aged poorly.
No, to your point, you can find things I have been way more wrong about than just that. It's not that hard. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's not just like Ben and I who were wrong about that. It's people in the industry who are wrong about that as well. Like if you were asking around, towards like the end of October, hey, what do you think this offseason is going to look like? How do you think it's going to play out? I don't think you found anybody who was like, yeah, we're going to see an insane flurry of free agent activity right at the end of November where, $1 billion worth of contracts are going to be handed out. The vast, like just everybody that you talked to was saying, yeah, it's probably going to be pretty slow and you're probably not going to see anything until we have some more CBA certainty.
Exactly. I mean, why do you think we had that opinion? It was an opinion that came from talking to people. Like I remember talking to one agent toward it must have been the playoffs or something. And he was remarking like, man, this is not a good off season to represent a top free agent. It's just not. It turned out that it was, So it's a lot of people who are wrong about that one. Like you want to look back, like even a month ago or a month before that one, my playoff predictions for this year, I think they were almost all wrong. Like I whiffed across the board on playoff predictions. So it comes with the territory. That's all I got on that one. But Arden, I'll throw it into different territory here with this next question, which comes from Phil Pop at Parallax55. And the question is this. Well, the Jays certainly do need another bat. Do you think that replacing Simeon's numbers are unnecessary? I feel like a full year of Springer does that. So in essence, wouldn't you only need to replace 4 to 6 weeks of healthy Springer production?
I mean, in a sense, but somebody else is going to get hurt. Springer might get hurt again. Somebody's going to underperform. Like, I think you just want to build as much buffer as possible. You want to be as insulated as possible against, like, losing your star players for a stretch, right? Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette, both remarkably healthy in 2021. Can you count on that going forward? You hope so, but injuries happen, man. Fluke stuff happens. Guys get, hit by a pitch on their wrist or on their hand and break a little bone in there, and they're out for 6 weeks, right? Or the guys step on a bag in a weird way and strain a ligament in their knee, and they're out for a period of time. So, I don't think that, yes, I think the Blue Jays, as presently constructed, are going to have a pretty good offense again next year with some of a healthy George Springer replacing Simeon's production. But no, they should not stop there. Like, they absolutely should add more impact to this offense and try to make it as robust as possible.
100%. I mean, you look at I think the question is almost more, what remaining space do you have on this roster? What remaining playing time do you have to allocate? And then how do you make the most of that, given what you have to trade, given what you have to spend, given what else you have in-house? How do you make the most of that remaining opportunity? Because there are going to be at-bats. There are going to be stretches where you need to have players stepping up and taking over those reps. So you need to have the best roster possible for those moments. That means you can't stop, even if you like your offense the way it's currently set up.
Absolutely. And this next one kind of ties into that a little bit as well. This comes from Dan PB at DLindsay80_PB. How surprised were you to hear the Jays were in on Seeger and Simeon? Do you think they could fit another huge contract in this offseason and still have the money to extend young players?
This is a good question. The fact that they explored the Seeger possibility is telling. So I think the answer is yes. They do have the flexibility, and we were talking about this with Freddie Freeman too. They're not ruling those contracts out. Now, are there also scenarios where they add more modest players on more modest deals? Of course. They've already spent on $200 million players this offseason. It is by no means a guarantee that they get a third, but my read is that it's a possibility. I think when you look at the payroll in 2022, they have some room. when you look at 2023, it starts to get pretty crowded because you've got some guys, including Lourdes and Ryu and Teoscar, who are in their final years with this team, or at least their final years under contract. So they're going to walk that line carefully, but to me, it's a possibility.
Yeah, well, and even the options for one of those mega deals are kind of limited as for what remains out there. We talked about Freeman, Correa, obviously, Trevor Story, Chris Bryant. That's about it, right? Who else would be in that kind of like 9-figure tier? Like could you squint and see like a Nick Castellanos in there? Like,
Yeah,
maybe,
Rodon, maybe,
right? But yeah, so that's about it. So you really are just kind of like looking at that upper, echelon. As we said, we don't really expect Freddie Freeman to sign with this club. I think Carlos Correa is going to go somewhere he can play shortstop. Bryant, Story, maybe. It'll depend, right? Like, so, but the interesting part about that question was, were we surprised to hear that the Jays were in on Corey Seeger? No, like not at all. Like the Blue Jays have said they're looking to be like impact players in free agency. They're looking to sign some of the best players available. They're looking to win now and acquire win now talents. Like, of course, they're in on Corey Seager. I mean, like I think that within the Blue Jays front office, they're like ideal, perfect world scenario for this offseason was signing Corey Seager to play third base. Like that was their like perfect outcome for this offseason. But how often do you get your perfect outcome? It really kind of never happens, right? So like the Blue Jays were in on Seager, but they were in to the extent that it was like, hey, do you want to move across an international border and make less money than you will in the tax-free state of Texas and move off of your preferred position? Like there were just a lot of reasons for Corey Seager to have, like he just had more attractive options, right? Like maybe in a different offseason where like George Springer's picking between the Blue Jays and the Mets, and he's like, yeah, the Blue Jays are a bit more attractive to me, but I think like Seager just had better options this winter. But yeah, of course the Blue Jays were in on him. The Blue Jays are in on top players in the market, like they have been for the last several seasons, and they continue to be.
Well, I think that all tracks with the way I see things. And one point that you make there in particular, I think, is worth kind of revisiting. As you look at this, the way it makes sense to me is if they had gotten Corey Seager, he would have played third base. Yeah. And that's just worth kind of emphasizing because there was some chatter around, what would have happened with Bo Bichette? My understanding, Bo Bichette basically going to be the shortstop. Like they're not looking to move around there. So Seager, who's okay at shortstop, but not a difference maker there, probably would have been a third baseman if he had come to the Blue Jays. And that kind of leads us to another question here. This one comes via email, and you can email us just as a reminder, not only for this episode, but if you have questions throughout the year, at the letters at sportsnet.ca. This one comes from Sam in Hamilton. Hey guys, do you think the Blue Jays will also be the mystery team for Carlos Correa? Also, do you think George Springer has texted him to come to Toronto? Thanks. Great question, Sam. Thanks for those. Arden, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure that Springer and Correa text, probably sending some happy holidays texts to each other right now, checking in on the families, seeing how everybody's doing. Yeah, look, for Carlos Correa to come to Toronto, again, he'd probably have to play third base. Right, like maybe you'd think about moving Bo for Correa, but I think the Blue Jays are pretty happy with Bo Bichette as their shortstop and pretty committed to him going forward. So it'd be like, hey, Carlos Correa, do you want to come to Toronto, move off your preferred position? I mean, geez, the money they would take, because you think about what Seager set that market at, and Correa should be getting more than Seager, one would imagine. Yep. So if Seager got, 10,325, was it? Yep. For Correa, I just think that bidding, that price gets to a point where the Blue Jays probably aren't comfortable with it and probably look for other alternatives.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with both of those answers. Yes, I would bet that Springer has texted Correa. Why not, right? See what happens. But, does it lead to a contract? I don't see it. And, as you said, positionally, Correa is so good defensively. Like he is a very, the arm is obviously incredible. He's a great defensive shortstop and deserves to stay at the position. So that makes it a little bit of a clunkier fit with the Blue Jays compared to Houston, the Yankees, teams that actually could use a shortstop right now. who's a very, very good defender at short. So then you get to the contract, probably 350 plus. I don't see it happening. So we'll see, but that's another one where it's more likely they have an initial conversation and doesn't lead to a deal.
Craig Babstock asks, hasn't Kevin Biggio earned the opportunity to play second base next season? First-still players are valuable, but most stars are not utility players. Moving Biggio all over the field surely hasn't helped his development. I feel he's paying for the weird obsession with Ben Zobrist. So a lot there, Ben. What do you think about Kevin Biggio?
Well, I think Kevin Biggio is due for a bounce-back season. I think that he'll be a very helpful player for the Blue Jays in 2022. I would dispute the premise that the obsession with Ben Zobrist is weird. I think it makes complete sense that if you have in Zobrist's case, a switch hitter, guy who can play multiple positions, who can switch, inning to inning, game to game, I think being obsessed with a player like that is very rational. It makes all the sense in the world. Those guys are hard to come by. They create immense value. And so whether it's, Chris Taylor, who's probably a step down from Biggio, a Marwin Gonzalez, Chris Taylor will be a step down from Zobrist. Then you get to maybe a Marwin Gonzalez, a Kevin Biggio. We'll see where Biggio's career takes him, right? He's still young in his career. He still has a chance to ascend to heights that he has not yet reached. But I think he's a very useful player. I don't think that you hand him a starting job on a silver platter, but I do think he ends up helping this team, probably getting 400 at-bats in 2022 and helping them with that versatility.
Yeah, he's going to get an opportunity next year, this year, whatever you call it. That's for sure. Because, look, Ross Atkins is not mentioning him unprompted all the time by accident, right? He's going to get an opportunity. And it's probably worth, remembering as well the context of just how many injuries he dealt with in 2021. He was never really healthy, and it's so difficult to find a consistent groove when you're battling that many things physically. And then I do think that, physical ailments really do creep into your psyche as a ball player mentally as well. Something Nate Pearson talked a bit to me about recently when I wrote about him. It's just about, going out there, not feeling 100% every day and trying to compete at the highest level. It's a very, very hard thing. And layer that on top of some pretty substantial adjustments Kevin Biggio was trying to make this year as well. He talked about them a lot in spring training about trying to attack pitches earlier in the count, trying to use more of the field so he wasn't going to get shifted as aggressively. Those are hard things to do, full stop, let alone when you're really banged up and playing through injuries. So yeah, I agree with you. I think he's a good bounce back bet. He's a good bet to be better in 2022 than he was in 21. And a lot of that has to do with how tough his 21 was. But a lot of that also has to do with the fact that he still has best in class plate discipline, just elite judgment of the strike zone. And that skill remains. That hasn't gone away, and it's a pretty good one to build off of. So if he can sort of, be patient and disciplined, replicate that, maybe live a bit more with the fact that he's going to get jawed by umpires sometimes. He doesn't have to expand to counter that. Live with the fact that sometimes he's going to have a really good line drive contact that results in an out to the third baseman in shallow right field. Just kind of live with some of those things. And just some of these things that are kind of be part and parcel to his approach and his skill set. I think he can come out the other end with a really high OBP and a decent amount of pop, considering that he does still hit the ball relatively hard and a guy with above average MLB exit velocities. So then he kind of ends up being what we've always said he is, right? Just a selective left-handed hitter with, the ability to play a bunch of positions, a second baseman primarily, but in a pinch, you could use him at third and first, capable of playing outfield corners. Maybe not an everyday MLB starter, but a really solid, complementary piece who has a role in a good MLB team.
If he hits 220, 340, 400 with 15 homers,
Beautiful.
You're good with that. Yeah, no problem there. All right, here's another one for you, Arden. Do you think the Blue Jays... Oh, I should say who this comes from. This is a question from @Daily Sports Talk. The question is, do you think the Blue Jays would ever spend $10+ million a year for a guy in the bullpen?
I do, because they were in on Liam Hendricks last year, and that's what it was going to take for Liam Hendriks. So I think they would do it for the right guy, and it would take like the right mix of stuff and durability and competitiveness, like just like the right, the Liam Hendriks, like Ryan Presley tier of guy who, if they were available via free agency, like that's what you would have to spend to get them. And I think the Blue Jays would do that. Like, I think it's a pretty slim class. It's like we're talking the best of the best relievers in MLB, but I think that, yeah, if you could acquire a guy like that, I think the Blue Jays would do that for $10 million.
Yeah. I mean, the question is framed as would they ever? To me, the answer is yes. Not going to be their first move, not going to be, clearly they have needs that need to be addressed probably more in a more pressing way, but would they ever? Yes, that's on the table.
At RBGSJ1980 asks, what do you think is the Blue Jays window to win? How do they proceed this or next offseason to maximize this?
Well, the way they're looking at it is they I think, kind of want to reject the premise of windows, right? They don't want to limit themselves to this limited opening. They want to create an extended opening. So I think that's their goal. Whether they have to reset at some point, whether they have to change course, we'll see. But the Dodgers aren't operating with a window. I mean, that, or at least if they are, we don't see the end of that window approaching. The Yankees have been in a window, if you want to call it that, for 30 years, like almost my entire lifetime. Like, I literally can't. I've been a baseball fan my whole life, right? I cannot remember the Yankees ever being bad. I just, like, it's not in my whole life. I can't remember it. So, they don't operate with windows. The Dodgers don't. I think that's where the Blue Jays want to get. To me, that's not something that it's not like a 2 or 3 year thing. It's not like when Vladdy's, years of control are up, then they somehow just reset.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. It's now. The Blue Jays are trying to win now, trying to win the World Series in 2022. The time is now. And yeah, they hope that window never really closes. They hope it's sustainable, and they're just kind of layering in some of the pieces that you need for that, which is like really, really good development, really great talent acquisition through draft and through amateur free agency, internationally, a stadium that generates a bunch of revenue for you so that you can go out and splash around in the free agent market. Like, this stuff doesn't happen overnight, but, over the last 5-6 years, the Blue Jays have been slowly layering those things in, and I expect they will continue to until they reach their goal.
All right, next question comes from Leafs01. What is realistic to expect for Randall Grichuk next year? Will he even still be on the team? And if so, how prominent a role does he figure to play? Also curious for your thoughts on how the Jays would cover for Springer in center field if Grichuk gets moved, knowing his limitations.
Yeah, I think if he isn't traded, or if you don't acquire somebody else who can kind of back up at center field, like, yeah, absolutely. Like, Randall Grichuk is on this team next year. I know he didn't have the greatest 2021, but I think that the Blue Jays believe, and I think it's actually pretty reasonable to believe, that he can be better, that he can be a better player than how he played this year. And I think that internally the Blue Jays project him to be a pretty decent player, like, a decent hitter, like a really good right fielder, an okay providing cover center fielder. I know for whatever this is worth, and everybody's mileage is going to vary, like, his compete level and his like effort level on a nightly basis is really, really high. And that's something the Blue Jays value, and something the Blue Jays really like about him, is that, like, he has really, slumps, hot streaks, however he's going at the plate, however he's playing, however the team is playing. Randall Grichuk's effort is really consistent. Like, he plays really hard.
He tries
really hard, night in and night out. And the Blue Jays like that. So, but like a greater picture, yeah, is he a little bit redundant on their roster? Maybe. Like, has he been famously inconsistent throughout his career? Yes, obviously. So you swallow some risk there, and it's not ideal. But with his contract and with his recent performance, you're kind of looking for that, like some of those ideas I've been throwing out, like Grichuk for Odorizzi or Grichuk for Gregorius. Like, those would be sort of the moves you could make. But as things stand right now, like, look, going into last season, it was like, is Randall Grichuk going to be on this team? How is he going to fit on this roster? Well, he was on the team the entire year, and he did fit on the roster. So I think he still will fit going into 2022. It'll just depend if there are other moves that happen around him that could, create a scenario where the Blue Jays are moving on from Grichuk, but it would take those moves to happen first, I think. I don't think the Blue Jays are going out and making a Grichuk move and then trying to backfill and then trying to find someone else. It would take another move that would make him more expendable than he is now.
Just to add on to our thought on, how he's putting that effort forward. I know there are probably some people thinking, well, like, of course he is. It's Major League Baseball. You have to do that. And I agree. But like any, field where you're working 180 days straight, some guys are really able to bring that and some guys are not. Marcus Semien, for example, would be another guy who was extremely professional and consistent with that. Grichuk has been described as someone who also brings that. So just adding a little context there. Now, when it comes to his usage, it was very clear at the end of last year. The Blue Jays deprioritized him. They did not use him in situations that they normally would have. He was an afterthought at best as they went down the stretch and played their most important games. So to me, that says he's not a big priority, but he can still be useful. He's definitely a Major League player who belongs on a Major League roster. Is that the Jays roster? We'll see. There was a report from Ken Rosenthal that said that the Jays had talked with the Brewers about a Jackie Bradley Jr. swap. That's, again, the kind of deal that you're talking about there, Arden, where it makes sense on paper. It's a bit of a contract swap, veterans going back and forth. JBJ brings defense. That's something the Jays need behind Springer because Springer's not someone who you project for 150 games. Maybe he gives you 125, 130.
Yeah, totally. Jesse Burrell asks, how much of an impact will the lack of access to player facilities and communication with coaches affect this Blue Jays team this winter and the coming season?
Well, so my answer here, I thought about this one as we were looking through these responses. I actually don't think it will make that much of an impact. And here's why. I think that the Blue Jays, as an organization, knowing that a lockout might be coming, have put in place these workout plans, have made sure that their players are equipped with the information and tools they need, even though they can't talk to those players for this period of time. So my understanding of this, or my interpretation of this at least, is that the Blue Jays have actively worked to make sure that the impact will be as small as possible, if that makes any sense. So the threat that this lack of access to facilities, that's a real threat. But my sense is that they're going to work around that to mitigate it and to make sure that, ultimately the impact.
Yeah, it's not like this lockout caught anybody by surprise. Like the Blue Jays knew this was coming. Yeah. They knew what the realities were going to be. So for anybody who needed that help, I'm sure that they, took steps to make sure they had the resources they needed prior to a point where they could no longer communicate with those individuals. I'm certain that happened. And then also, we're only dealing with 40-man roster players, right? So if you're non-40, you can still, use team facilities, you're good, right? So it's just 40-man roster guys. So, your guys who have made money, your established big leaguers, they're fine. They've got facilities. They've got resources to find their way to get, whatever mounds they need to throw off of gyms. They got money. They're good. They're set up. It really doesn't hurt that guy. So then, who would it hurt? It would be kind of like that layer of 40-man players who haven't made their big league debuts yet.
Like a Trent Thornton, maybe, who's,
Maybe. He's made some money too, though, right? And he would, a guy like that who, he would have an old, high school coach he could call to go college guy, right? Like Steven Matz was throwing at his old high school when, during his little COVID break during the season, right? Yeah. So,
it's not like you need to spend 10 hours a day on Rapsodo, and if you do buy a Rapsodo,
the majority of these guys would have an old connection. Actually, the guy I would think about would be the international free agent who signed out of Venezuela for freaking, 10, 20K or something, now lives in the United States away from the environment he grew up in and is now oh, what do I do? Because I haven't made a lot of money and I'm here in the US and I can't use the team facilities. I'm on the 40-man. That's the guy who then would probably have to call a teammate or a friend with another organization and be hey, can I come work out with you? Hey, what are you doing? Can I get access to, the facilities that you're using? And usually I think that they would be able to find a solution that way. But that's also exactly the kind of guy that the club would have sorted something out with prior to the lockout and been hey, let's get you set up. The actual thing that that I think about with all this is just that the Blue Jays spent $100+ million on this brand new state-of-the-art training center, and since they opened it have not really been able to maximize it at all for a variety of reasons, right? At the beginning it was like half under construction, and then the pandemic hit and you had restrictions on the number of people you could have in there and distancing and all that, and now you got a lockout, which means that like none of your 40-man guys can get into the facility. So it's not a really ideal start to the PDC era, and it's probably a little bit frustrating for some people with the Blue Jays.
Yeah, good thing it's a very long-term investment on that one. All right, that was a good question. A lot of good questions so far. Our next one here comes from Garth Orgy, and the question is, who will be a breakout player for the Jays in 2022, and why? Why will it be Julian Merryweather?
I think the Blue Jays would be stoked if it was Julian Merryweather, definitely. I don't know, it's kind of hard to think of who a breakout player would be for the Blue Jays, right? Because they got a lot of like established dudes. Maybe we'll throw it back to you. Like who would be a breakout player for the Blue Jays this year?
Man, I mean, they had a lot of breakouts this past season. Moreno could be one, or Pearson. I think those are the two logical candidates here.
Yeah, those are kind of like the obvious candidates, right? Like you could go like way off the map and be like, oh yeah, like Hagen Danner is going to show up as a late game reliever or something like that, or Anthony Castro or someone like that, right? But yeah, the Blue Jays are like kind of so established. Like they could have some minor league breakouts, but it's not like they're not going to be in the majors, right? Like Aurelvis Martinez might like shoot up to, being like a top 10, top 20 prospect or something like that.
Totally. And that's what we saw. I mean,
on the big league club, like it's hard.
And what counts as your breakout year, right? I mean, this is the year that Gabriel Moreno broke out as a top prospect. He subsequently could have a year where he breaks out in the major leagues. I think, Pearson or Moreno would be the biggest candidates. Merryweather, just for health reasons, Garth, sorry to say this to you, but I do not see Merryweather being that guy, unfortunately, because he is fun to watch when he's on.
All right. This is from BK at BEQ. What do you guys think is the best way to use/develop Nate Pearson in 2022, knowing his likely innings limitations?
Another good one. Thanks for the question, BK. All right. I mean, the Jays have outlined a plan where they expect him to be pitching, multiple innings, kind of in a Luis Patino, Shane Mcclanahan type role, where he's able to go 4 or 5 at a time. I think you start with that, on days that Pearson's pitching, if he is starting. And again, to me, you don't hand him a rotation spot unless he's commanding the ball. It's a win-now team. You need to be winning games. This is not, development camp anymore. So if he is commanding the ball and he earns a spot in the rotation, and then great, let him go 4 or 5 innings and go from there. If that proves to be kind of a sweet spot for him, it's taking him 100 pitches to get through 5, keep him there, don't push it too much. If it turns out that he's getting through 5 innings in 70 pitches, let him keep going. Let him push it a little bit and air it out. I don't think you need to put unnecessary limitations on Pearson or on any pitcher who's, say, 24 years old and on the 40-man roster. It's a moving target. I guess I don't have a clear answer because so much of it depends on how he is throwing and, to me, how he is commanding the ball.
Yeah, assuming health, I think Pearson is either in your rotation at the big league level to open the season, or he's like Buffalo's opening day starter. Like I don't think he's going to be in the Blue Jays bullpen.
I wonder
to
about
open
that.
the season. I don't think he will be. I think that he's going to be either starting in the big leagues or starting at AAA as like your number 6, and your depth. You brought up Shane Mcclanahan, who I think is like the perfect comp for like how the season goes from like a workload perspective. Because like Mcclanahan was a guy who 2020, like he was just like an alt-site guy. And then in 2021, made 25 starts, but only threw like 125 innings, right? Like, and he didn't always pitch on 5 days rest, or 4 days rest. He rarely went over 5 innings, like rarely went over 90 pitches. Like that's going to kind of, I think how the Blue Jays are going to approach Pearson is like, we're going to steal you extra days of rest where we can. yeah, you're probably going to be, 5 innings, 90 pitches kind of guy. And we're going to try to get you to around like 25 starts, 125 innings pitched. Like kind of like Manoa is another good example, right? From last season, was like 25, 26 appearances, like 130 innings pitched. Like I think that's where the Blue Jays would like to get Pearson, assuming a full healthy 2022.
Yeah, I think that would be a great season. If he pitches 125, a lot of things have gone right.
You're up, man.
All right. Well, then let me throw this question at you, and it comes from Greg McGrath 10. Do you think Lourdes and Teoscar have any chance of getting extended? And if not, are they likely to be traded within the next year and a half?
Well, there's a chance they could be extended. I think the Blue Jays would like to extend like all of their players, really. Like I think that any young player that you like, the team wants to extend them, right? Like because extensions that buy out years of free agency at below market rates are just so insanely valuable to a team. Especially if a player remains like healthy and productive. Like they don't all work out, obviously, but the majority of them do work out because it just makes sense on the team side far more often than not. I think that ultimately what it would take is Teoscar Hernandez and Lourdes Gurriel Jr. to align in value with the Blue Jays. Because I promise you, the Blue Jays are not going to go a nickel above what they believe the value of those two players are, and the value I promise you, already placed on those two players. Like they've already talked about this stuff. Like it's funny when you get these questions sometimes, like why aren't the Blue Jays extending Bo Bichette? Why won't they talk about extending Bo Bichette? They've talked about it. They've talked about extending Bo. They've talked about extending Vlad. They've talked to Bo's people about extending him. They've talked to Vlad's people about what it would take to extend him. These conversations have happened. It's not like, can you imagine like Ross Atkins walks into the Blue Jays like front office, tomorrow and is like, hey, Mark, can I get like a second with you? I was just like on Twitter and somebody brought up this like crazy idea. Do you think we should extend Bo Bichette? Of course these conversations, I'm pretty sure Bo's talked about it on the record. I'm pretty sure that, about having conversations an extension. Of course the Blue Jays are looking to do this. It just depends on value, right? And also like it's different, right? When you're extending like a Jose Barrios as a starting pitcher, Blue Jays can be pretty motivated to get that done because like the replacement cost of a young, effective, durable starting pitcher is rather high. Now, the replacement cost of a corner outfielder, such as Teoscar Hernandez, Lourdes Gurriel Jr., probably a bit less. Tends to be more of those players floating around. They're more acquirable in trade. There's more of them on the free agent market. And then that sort of plays on the flip side to how Teoscar and Lourdes think about the possibility of extending with the Blue Jays, because they, and this is what they pay their agents for, are weighing like, hey, who else is going to be available on the open market when I get to free agency? Like who else is going to be in that class? What teams are likely to be spending money at that time? Like what's the possibility of, me getting a lot substantially more than I would in terms of signing an extension with the Blue Jays. So there's so many factors that play into it. Comfortability in Toronto, how much those guys like the organization, like where they're at, what their families want to do. We never say enough like how much like families play a part in these decisions, spouses, kids, where you want your kids to be in school, communities where you're going to live, where the grandparents are at, how far away from them you want to be, how often you want to be getting, grandma on a, international flight throughout the season. Like all those things play into it. So like, I think there would definitely be a willingness on the Blue Jays side, but for, Teoscar and Lourdes would have to be pretty willing as well to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, without a doubt. You make a lot of good points there. This actually ties into another question. So I'm gonna throw this question in right here. It comes from King of T, 528, 42, 688. The question is, which pieces are most likely to be moved in trade? And would the Jays risk moving Gurriel and harming the chemistry and friendship he has with Vlad, Teo, and Springer? So I'll kind of combine my answers here because it really does connect. I think that, as you point out, replacing a corner outfield bat is an easier thing to do. And this is almost every year. It's easier to do that than it is to replace a franchise shortstop. And the prices in the market reflect that. You want a franchise shortstop? Okay. Spend $350 on Correa. Spend $325 on Seeger. Spend $175 on Simeon. Like, it's expensive. So you have one of those guys in-house. You probably want to keep him. Now, you only have so many dollars to spend. You only have so many big contracts you're going to give out, even as the Blue Jays continue to operate as a big market team, as they should. So not everyone's getting a big deal. And as much as you like Teoscar Hernandez, as good as Lourdes Gurriel Jr. is as a hitter, these guys are legitimately valuable. They're really good players. But I see them as less likely when it comes to extension candidates. If they came to the Jays and said, hey, we really want to stay here, we'll sign for a below market deal, of course that's on the table. But I don't know. I see it as less likely. And then, that leads to a trade conversation. I don't think the Jays are eager to trade these guys. Yeah, they've gotten hits on both of them this offseason, as you'd expect. I don't think they're eager to trade them. As for the idea, though, of would they trade Gurriel and risk harming the chemistry and friendship he has? It's a question that I've gotten periodically, as you see these guys in the dugout, and they're obviously close. They obviously enjoy playing alongside each other. But to me, it's just not a factor. Like, you're not worried about that. It's you don't delight in breaking up a friend group or in taking these guys apart from each other, but they've got the whole off season to hang out. They can get dinners on the road together. They can still text and FaceTime. And this is a Major League Baseball team. If someone doesn't get to play with their friend anymore, so be it. Life goes on.
Yeah, and everybody's going to be pretty friendly and having a pretty good time if you're winning 95 games
Exactly.
and going to the postseason, right? Everybody's going to be pretty happy about that. So,
Exactly.
Yeah. That feels like as good a place as any to cut it off here. But thank you, everybody, for your questions. Very much appreciated. Thanks for listening all year. Hope you have a very happy and warm holidays. And we'll talk to you in 2022. For producers Nick Andrade and Christian Ryan, for Ben Nicholson Smith, my name's Arden Zwelling, and this has been At the Letters.